Hello, welcome to this episode of Defying the Status Quo podcast. I'm so glad you've joined me today because I have a guest that I have wanted to host on the podcast for so long. Her name is Erika Armstrong, and Erika wrote a book called A Chick in the Cockpit. And I mean, we are all about that. Erika, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, Renee. Thank you so much for inviting me over.
Well, fantastic. I really want to hear about your story because obviously you're a pilot, and that's not a super common job held by women. So I want to know how you got into that to begin with, and then where all piloting has taken you.
So I'm a little different than most of my friends. Most of my friends grew up having this desire to be a pilot. They kind of knew what they wanted when they were young. I grew up never once thinking about being a pilot. Never once did I think I could do it. Never a possibility. The only woman I knew of when I was growing up was Amelia Earhart, and it didn't turn out so well for her. So I never thought about it. So I actually became a pilot by accident. I was in college and I was working two jobs, and I still couldn't afford to pay my rent and my tuition. So I was just looking for a job that had really crummy hours. And of course, aviation is 24/7, 365. So there was an opening at the front desk of a little airport called Flying Cloud, just at the FBO there at Elliott Beechcraft, it was called at the time. And only because the hours were horrible, I applied and got the job. And so I sat behind the desk, and I was working with corporate aircraft coming in and out, and spending time with the pilots and learning the industry. And I remember my very first day, I didn't realize that there was a whole other language. Just even the alphabet, you had to know a different language. So, the first day they wanted me to talk on the Unicom radio, and I didn't even know how to push the button. So, I just started learning about it, and then at 5 o'clock, all the suits would go home, and then the line guys would come in, and we'd be doing our paperwork, and they would be telling their stories about learning how to fly. And so I started helping them learn and take their written exams. I asked them questions out of their books, and as I sat and listened to it, I thought, this isn't rocket science. It's mostly common sense. So there was a tipping point where I thought, well, maybe I can do this. So I went next door, I took one flying lesson, and I was hooked. 30 years later, I'm still in the industry and loving every minute of it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So you got your private pilot's license, and then you decided you wanted to pursue it as a career. Where did you start? How did you build your hours?
So I encourage, as I am teaching some students now, the first thing I teach them is not about aviation, it's about networking and making connections with other pilots. Especially for the women entering, to make those connections. So because I was working at the airport, it was a fabulous way to always have that network of people that are going to help you out. So the company I was working for had a really small charter department. They had a couple of King Airs. And actually, it was because of the flu that I actually got my first big break. All of our pilots were out sick, and I already had my hours and my time, and I just wanted my first break. I just wanted to sit in the right seat of a King Air. The King Air itself only requires one pilot to fly it, but our operating specifications said that we needed two pilots. So I just wanted to get the captain his coffee and maybe run the radios a little bit. And finally one day we were out of pilots. The chief pilot came up and said, okay, if you're willing to come out to the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning and do a check ride, we'll put you in the right seat of a King Air. So once I started building up that good turbine time, it was able to open up more doors for me in the charter world. So I flew about a dozen years in charter before I went to the airlines.
That's amazing. Well, I want to pull out a couple of lessons that I heard that you learned in there. And I think that they're important for anyone who's developing a career in any field, especially one that's as technical as flying. And that's number one, you have to be humble. You have to be willing to start at the bottom and pay your dues and work your way up, because that attitude really gets noticed by other people. And then secondly, the importance of networking. And I know that a lot of young pilots my daughter included, who are now looking at, oh, well, I don't know how I'm going to get a job flying an aircraft with my commercial pilot's license, because it seems like the pilot shortage has deflated, right? There is a glut of pilots now with people leaving the airlines. And so it makes them nervous, but that networking, that asking for opportunities, taking the opportunities that are given to you, even if they aren't exactly what you want to be doing, are the ones that really can lead to something great. Charter's a great career. I imagine that you saw a lot of interesting places flying charter.
Absolutely. In chartering, it took me around the world. I got to fly to Australia and New Zealand and Maui, and of course, in the United States, going to all the luxury resorts and getting to go where my passengers were going. So you definitely meet a whole unique segment of the population flying corporate. It's kind of the 1% of the 1% that can own their own airplanes, and most of them have fascinating stories. I love to just, sometimes even on a layover, I'd run into my passengers and they'd invite me over, to have a few beers and hang out. I loved hearing their stories. So fascinating people out there. And then tell your daughter that I think that we're setting ourselves up for an even bigger pilot shortage. That's a whole other story, but so many pilots took early retirement from the airlines, way past what I thought that people would be taking. So in 24 months, you come and find me, because I think we're going to be in a pilot shortage situation again. So
fantastic. I will definitely let her know that you said that. Erika, you indicated before we got on the call today that you have teenagers, and I just heard you say that you shifted from corporate to airlines. Were the two related?
So I had already gone to the airlines before I started having kids. The one thing about the airlines for a pilot is that you will have a set schedule. I flew air ambulance for so many years, and it was just a random schedule. But even at the airlines, I remember when I was a very new flight engineer on the 727, I got sent down to pick up an airplane out of maintenance, and I was told I'd be back the same day, so I didn't even pack an overnight bag. 5 days later, I was still down there waiting for the airplane to get fixed. So, as far as, women in aviation and having, the whole human experience of having kids and everything, no matter who you are, it's going to be an extra challenge if you decide to have the whole family structure. So the airlines do offer just a little bit more structure for the scheduling, but it can still get thrown out the window at any moment. So it's definitely part of the thought process. Most of my pilots that come into the classroom, they have their blinders on and they just want to go to the airlines. And that's kind of how I was too, without realizing that business aviation was there as an opportunity to actually make a whole career out of. So I kind of had it set that I wanted to go to the airlines, fly the big heavy iron. But now that I've been in both worlds, I'll have to admit I enjoyed corporate aviation much more than the airlines. I got based, and I had 6 different bases in 2 years, and just the whole commuting on each end of my work schedule, it was just an enormous burden just getting to work. So there's positive and negatives of both, but if you're in it to really enjoy flying airplanes and that whole adventure and that whole lifestyle, you can't beat business aviation. You just can't.
Well, you're speaking my language, but I want to talk about a little bit about the challenges of being a woman in the aviation industry. Obviously, if you hadn't faced challenges, you wouldn't have written a book called A Chick in the Cockpit. So tell me about some challenges that you faced, maybe 1 or 2 obstacles that you've had to overcome because you're a woman.
Well, let's see. So earlier in my career, the irony is one of my biggest obstacles was actually another woman. I had been working for a company for about 6 years. I was doing a little bit of flying. Most of my work requirements were working the front desk. I also worked back in the maintenance department and doing paperwork. So she had encouraged me to come over to work for her. She wanted me to bring a few of my clients to come with, but she said if I came over and worked over there, she would guarantee that I would be doing more flying than I was now. So, did a little soul searching and, getting out of my comfort zone, leaving a job that I'd been at for 6 years. And so I went across the field, worked for this other company. And after 6 months, I still hadn't flown a single trip. Now I'm out of currency. Now I'm really concerned about, being able to fly at all. So I finally just had a sit down conversation with her. And I said, you encouraged me to come over here. You got to tell me now what's going on. And she said, well, you know what, I just thought about it. And she said that she felt that her C-level clients, C-suite clients would not be comfortable with a woman flying them. So, I was just heartbroken because, she had set up this whole thing that I would come and work for her. So once again, it was, more of a desperation need. We were out of pilots once again, working over here. And the chief pilot was my big advocate over there. He looked at my resume. He's like, you've got more hours and experience than most of these guys that I'm hiring. So I'm watching all these new pilots coming in, getting hired. They were the cliche, handsome, gray hair at the ears. So he's kind of pushed her to at least give me a chance. And so thankfully, my very first trip that I did over there, the clients they were regular clients. They flew quite often. When we got back from the trip, they actually called her up and requested to have me fly them. So for her, it was a tipping point on perspective. She all of a sudden realized, hey, I was wrong in the way I perceived this. So it took that one moment for her to just change her idea and perception. And from that point on, I gradually went over to flying the flight line. It took another maybe 6 months to get away from the front desk. But the irony is that you become valuable to get hired there because you know the business and the experience, but so then it's hard to get away from the front desk and actually spend more time in the cockpit.
Yeah, I think this is a really significant point, and it's something that as leaders in our industry, we have to be really aware of. And that's that women discriminate against other women. It's not just men discriminating against women. And my experience is, yes, I've been bullied by men doing what I do and have definitely faced my share of discrimination. But the ones that hurt the most are the ones when you get stabbed in the back, figuratively speaking, of course, by a woman. And I think that it's really important for us to be on the lookout for that we reach out and extend a hand to other women and not slap it away. I think that's a really important point that you bring up because it does hurt and it does happen. So we need to acknowledge that. Anything else that you would say has been a challenge that you've had to overcome in the industry?
And then we kind of brushed on this before. Most everybody starts flying in their teens and 20s. And at that point in your life, you can't even imagine yourself getting married, having kids. If you had asked me at 20 that I would be married with kids, I'd say absolutely not. I didn't want kids at that time. I just couldn't imagine it. But we all know that, as you move down through life, all of a sudden things change and all of a sudden maybe you do want to have a family. So, Gloria Steinem would probably hate me saying this, but if you want this whole big aviation career, you need to have a good spouse. You need to have a good partner in there. Someone that actually, understands and has empathy for your schedule. And that's something that's never going to change. The nature of the job is that you are going to be away from home a lot. When I first started flying, I was gone at least 22 days out of the month. And that's hard on a partnership, a spouse, especially then when you start having children. So, having a good conversation with someone in their 20s to say, hey, put this in the back of your mind and just view the world that way. So my big struggle is that, I ended up in an abusive relationship. There's bad relationships and destructive ones. This one was an abusive relationship. And so it kind of pulled me back out of the cockpit again. I had to come back and deal with my home life. And so after all those years of putting all my effort into my job, that choice of relationship made me have to back off again and pull out of the cockpit. And I see a lot of women having to, come back out of their careers to help balance out that family life. So it's definitely a challenge for women, more so than men. That's not to say that there's not men out there that will give up their careers. it's just less likely that that will happen.
Yeah, the truth is that we see that a lot, and kudos to you for getting out of an unhealthy relationship and getting healthy and stepping back into aviation. Who's helped you the most in your career, Erika?
Oh my gosh, there's been so many people, and that's the balance. So for any person that's put up a barrier in front of you, just hang on to the fact that there are 10 people that are going to help you out to help that one person's barrier. So don't give up hope on that. Some of my biggest advocates were the least expected. There's the chief pilot early in my chartering career. He put his neck out to at least give me a chance, and that's all I wanted. I so appreciated those moments where they were willing to do that. One of my earliest mentors was a little old lady from the 99s. When I was first learning, getting my private pilot's license, she walked in the front door of an FBO, and I adored her right away. She cussed and swore, and she told it like the way it was. And I just never met, another woman pilot like her. And she would prod me along. I think one of the challenges for women in general is when they're younger, they don't have that self-confidence and that ego to get in the cockpit and believe that you can do this, because you are going to make a million mistakes. It's just part of learning. So to be able to get up each day after a bad day of bad landings or whatever it is you did wrong, to have that confidence to get back out there and do it again. Sometimes you had to be forceful. And so she'd nag me every time she'd come in. She'd say, "What are you doing? Are you doing your written? Are you getting out there? Are you flying?" So at the time I thought she was annoying, but I look back now and she was, one of the reasons I was spurred forward. So, and what I see these days is a lot more ability to network, even to have something as simple as a Facebook page that are designated just for women pilots, to talk about your challenges, no matter how big or small, and to hear input and opinions from other women. That's a huge help. Anyway, from childcare to, how do you go without peeing for 10 hours, simple things like that. So just a platform for women to open up and talk about their challenges has been helpful, I think, for the next generation coming up.
I love that. And that's a real thing, because in some of the planes, there's a pilot relief tube, but that does not really fit the relief parts of women very well. So it's crazy. That's a crazy obstacle to sometimes have to overcome. Okay, so we talked about your corporate aviation career, we talked about your airline career, and you are on a new adventure now. Tell us what you're doing.
So right now I am back in corporate aviation. I work for a company called Advanced Aircrew Academy. And so we were way ahead of COVID. So what we've been doing is doing e-learning programs for flight departments. So I'll go into a flight department and grab their training manuals and set up the recurrent and the initial ground training programs for their pilots, so that instead of having to get pulled in off the line to come in for your training every year, pilots can do their training at their leisure online. So I've been helping develop those instructional design courses. And we go out around the country and also do some safety workshops and marketing. So that's my primary role. And then I also teach at MSU Denver on the side. I teach aircraft systems and propulsion, and I teach aviation fundamentals and instrument fundamentals and commercial operations. So what I really like about the university is I have, of course, the new students that are 17, 18 years old coming out of high school, but I also have adult learners. A lot of them have already been in the military. I've had career military people coming back into the program. After 20 years in the military, they'd like to become pilots. So they're on stage 2 of their life, a whole entire career. So I love seeing the 50-year-old person sitting next to my 17-year-old student. And, at first they feel like they're complete opposites, but by the end of the class, they're laughing and joking, and that older student is able to give some advice to the younger ones, and the younger ones actually help the older students with the technology. For pilots these days, the skills are a little bit different. I mean, you still need those basic raw piloting skills, but the generation coming through now, they're so versed in technology learning how to run all the avionics and stuff is so much easier for them. Whereas the older generation, it's a barrier for them to learn it. So it's a nice balance to see that those different learning and teaching techniques are balanced in the classroom.
And what amazing life skills they're learning in that environment. I absolutely love that. Erika, will you tell us the piece of advice that you would go back today and give your 25-year-old self?
I'd say don't take advice.
What do you mean? Elaborate on that.
No, we have that little voice inside of our heads. And I know for women, a lot of times we dampen that voice out a lot. You know, I did take a lot of advice that ended up being wrong. And inside my head, I knew that it wasn't. So you really have to learn to listen to yourself and to know that what makes you happy now is going to be different between your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. What that, you know, your Zen is going to change. And so don't make yourself hang on to that original idea. If your goals and stuff change and it feels like it's right to change that, do so. You know, and I see a lot of the washout rate in aviation early on. You know, my students, I'd say out of the 100% that come in wanting to be pilots, only about 20% of them will actually follow on that course. But don't forget that there's about 10 million jobs in aviation. It's not just being a pilot, but I mean, even Renee here is got such a unique niche, and there's not a lot of women out there selling airplanes. What an incredible job. And you got to know your stuff. You got to walk the walk, and you can't sell a multi-million-dollar airplane unless you know how to talk about that airplane. So I hate seeing people come into the program and then just completely walk away. You know, now that the pilot requirements are so much higher, you have to have so many more hours than you used to have. It's hard to keep that motivation. So my one advice is to gather a network out there, even if it's as simple as just an online group where you can ask your questions. I know networking sounds so cliche, but it's so important. It's those people in the industry that are going to get you through those tough spots. Usually about 500-600 hours is when pilots are starting to question their career choices, because you can't get a job. You've spent so much money already. You don't want to walk away. So it's, there's those little teeter-totter points where those other people are going to help you tip the teeter-totter back on the other side and keep you going.
I love that. So don't doubt yourself, be willing to pivot and lean into other people. The aviation community is so strong. There's always going to be someone around who will encourage you. I think that's such valuable. Oh, so valuable. Okay, so you and I talked before we got on about a phenomenon in pilot or technician recruitment, and that's that there's been this huge focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. What's your take on that?
So I love that there's STEM programs out there. I think we do need to go back to our core skills out there. I think we still need a lot of the trade schools to be supported out there. What I'm finding and hearing from students coming into my program is that the people that weren't in STEM were never given opportunities, or nobody would come in and talk to those groups about like aviation or aerospace. So there's almost a barrier that we're putting up with our students that maybe would want to be a pilot. If they're not in the STEM program, there's some illusion that you can't go on to be a pilot. So being a pilot is so much more than taking a multiple choice exam. I've actually found that pilots and their ability to show their skills, it's really hard to quantify and show that on written exams. And that's how we filter our pilots. Having a good, flexible personality is actually the key, especially for business aviation. You have to be independent and to be able to think for yourself, because when you are dispatched on a charter flight, especially like air ambulance, it's the middle of the night, there's nobody else out there to help you. You are doing your own flight planning, your own weather research. You have to set up transportation, make sure airports are open in the middle of the night. So these are skills that you're not going to take on a test, and it's hard to teach. So the pilot personality is there is such a thing. If you are like a calm personality, you can just see an emergency and just say, okay, how are we going to deal with it instead of running away from it. All of the skills needed for aviation you can learn. You take a little bit at a time, break it down. It's common sense. The math that we use in aviation, it's common sense. It's learning how to do a weight and balance. The hardest part for pilots is converting Celsius to Fahrenheit. That's why when they get on the radio, they go, because they're trying to quickly convert those numbers, when they're talking to the passengers on the PA system. So, for any student that isn't, an A student, I'm telling you right now, the students in my class that are going to succeed in aviation, they probably don't have A's. They're out there working, they're out there flying, they get it, they know how to take a written exam, but they're personable, they get along with other people. I mean, think about being locked in a room with a stranger for 14 hours and having to function together. It's life and death decisions, especially when you have an emergency. So if you don't know how to get along with another person, you're a safety issue in the cockpit. So there's all these other skills that are required of a pilot. And while STEM is a wonderful program, don't let it be a barrier. If you're not in a STEM program, don't think that you can't be in aviation.
I love that. The other thing that I know that you have talked about before, and I found in a Women in Aviation and University of Nebraska at Omaha study, is that people are more attracted to the adventure or the challenge in aviation than they really are in the STEM aspects of it. So if you're interested, you're listening to this, you're interested in adventure or challenge, and you're not afraid of weights and balances and the physics of flying, man, aviation could be a great career for you. And if the physics isn't for you, there are lots of other careers in aviation besides flying. So Erika, thank you so much for being on today. I want to give you an opportunity to give any parting words that you want to give. And I want you to tell people how to buy your book and what they could expect to learn from that book.
So I wrote the book for my book club. You'll see in the story that they're actually the heroes at the end of the book club. So every single person listening here is going to have a challenge in their life. It's inevitable. We're human beings, right? So we're going to have something put in front of us that's going to take us completely off path, unexpected. So this was just a story to show what, the challenges of having maybe somebody else take away your career. So this is somebody else in this story, true story, does something to completely take you off track. And instead of self-destructing or, punishing yourself or making bad decisions, just another story out there to know that just keep going through. There's people out there that will support you, and the little tiny things of kindness that you can do in the world can make huge impacts on somebody. So my book club does a very small kindness for me, and they don't realize the depth of the impact that it had on me. So my story, my writing it was my give back to them, my thanks. Since they only knew half the story, I wanted to give them the whole story. So if anybody out there is in their piloting career and they're getting off track, you can reach me at Erika, it's Erika, at achickinthecockpit.com. You can drop me an email. If you need a local mentor, I'll try to find a connection for you. I have a few followers on LinkedIn, so I'll try to find somebody locally in your area, maybe that can just answer questions. Sometimes there's empty seats out there. Somebody's going to fly someplace and they, want to have just a safety pilot sitting next to them. Maybe I can hook you up with that. So reach out, let me know. You can find my book on Amazon, your local bookstores. Just Google A Chick in the Cockpit. You'll find my website, you'll find the book. And if you ever want an autograph for it, just email me. I'll send you out an autograph sticker you can put on the inside cover. Most people read Kindle these days, so it doesn't do much good, but just let me know if you guys need anything out there.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such an honor to talk to you today and a pleasure to have you on the podcast, just encouraging and inspiring the next generation of aviators. If you enjoyed this podcast today, I would love for you to share it with your network and also subscribe to the podcast overall. I interview women in all sorts of male-dominated industries, not just aviation, because what we've found is that if you are a crush it kind of woman, you can crush it in any kind of industry. And the women who are making great strides and defying the status quo in male-dominated industries have a lot in common. So this is an exploratory podcast to talk to women in all sorts of different industries. You can follow me on social media at Renee Bengelsdorf or visit my website, reneebengelsdorf.com. Erika, thanks again for being on today.
Thanks, Renee. Keep kicking ass out there.
You got it. You too.